Good afternoon and welcome. Very pleased to be here today to introduce the speaker in today's Gilbert Lecture. The Gilbert Lecture Series was established almost 25 years ago in 1988 by G.S. Beckwith Gilbert, who's the Princeton class of 1963. He may be here, I don't see him, but I understand that he might be showing up here this afternoon. The idea of the Beckwith Lecture Series is to bring innovative leaders in business, government, and the professions to campus to talk to us about their ventures and the insights they've gained in their careers. The first lecturer was Secretary of the Treasury Bill Simon, and the list of lecturers has been distinguished, including Senator Paul Sorbanes, also class of 54, Jeff Bezos, class of 86, Meg Whitman, class of 77, Steve Forbes, class of 70, and recently Sir Gordon Wu, class of 58, among many others. You can see it's a very distinguished group, including today's speaker. Today's lecture is sponsored by the Handlinger Center for Energy and the Environment, by the School of Engineering and Applied Science, the Princeton Environmental Institute, Whitman College, and the Keller Center for Innovation and Engineering Education. Our Gilbert lecturer today is a passionate environmentalist, an innovative business leader, and a true Detroit ambassador. Bill Ford has used his somewhat unconventional and sometimes unpopular vision of sustainable manufacturing and fuel efficiency to transform the way Ford Motor Company does business. Bill joined Ford as a product planning analyst shortly after his graduation from Princeton in 1979. He earned a master's degree in management from MIT in 1984. He rose through the ranks at Ford, becoming CEO in 2001, and then becoming executive chairman of the board in 2006. Bill has consistently encouraged the development of cleaner, more efficient, more energy-efficient vehicles and plant operations throughout his time at Ford. He was an environmental visionary from a young age. He recognized early the need for next-generation fuel cell technologies that would eventually replace fossil fuels. In 2004, Bill revolutionized the company's manufacturing complex, the Rouge Center in Dearborn, and this has become a model for sustainable manufacturing. Ford was, of course, the first automaker to bring to market a hybrid SUV, which won the 2005 North American Truck of the Year award. And Ford's first all-electric car, or electric-only car, is slated for market later this year. In a difficult economic environment, I think all of us know that Ford was the only of the three big U.S. automakers to pass on receiving federal bailout funds. Echoing Bill's great-grandfather Henry Ford's commitment to product excellence, Ford automobiles consistently top consumer quality and durability surveys, and with new and innovative marketing efforts focused on social media, the company is really flourishing, I think, as many of us who read the paper know. No one can introduce Bill without mentioning his love of sports. He was a member and officer of Princeton's championship 1979 rugby team. He's an avid ice hockey fan. I understand he also plays on the pond team for Ford. He's also been vice chairman of the Detroit Lions since 1995 and was instrumental in the effort to build Ford Field, an environmentally friendly stadium in Detroit. I think those of us who follow football know that it was also available when other stadiums in the Midwest were under snow. So that's true. Ford Field. While at Princeton, Bill majored in history and was president of Ivy. He and his wife Lisa, who's also a Princeton graduate, class of 1982, are parents to two Princetonians. I think we have one of them here today. Classes of 08 and 14. Bill and Lisa are both dedicated philanthropists, particularly as it relates to the Detroit area. In 2005, Bill created a foundation to fund scholarships for children of Ford employees to attend college. He's also chair of the board of directors of the Detroit Economic Club and vice president of the Detroit Lions Charities, which was founded to assist charitable and educational causes in Michigan with an emphasis on Detroit's children and youth. In an era of critical environmental challenges, Bill has built on the Ford legacy of quality and innovation to find new directions for the company while minimizing its impact on the environment. So Very happy to have Bill back at campus, and please join me in welcoming him.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And that was a far more impressive introduction than I deserve. So thank you. And I do know that some of my former rugby teammates are in the audience, and I'd appreciate it during Q&A if you did not take the microphone, please. First of all, what Princeton has become since I left is really staggering. If I think of the Princeton Environmental Institute and the Emlinger Center, and I think of my days on campus, how I would have loved to have had those two resources available to me. I did become an environmentalist largely when I was at Princeton, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I was flying by the seat of my pants. I didn't have the resources that are available to you all now, and they're spectacular. And you will be so much better informed and really much better equipped to enter the workforce and to help really change the world. And I think what you have here is really spectacular, and I'm very envious, but I love it. What I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes talking about what happened to our industry 4 or 5 years ago. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about the environmental challenges and what's happening there, because the transformation is huge. Then I'm going to talk about an issue that's looming on the horizon that most people aren't focusing on yet, but it's going to be a big one and a real one. And then finally, what I'd really like to do is to shut up and turn it over to all of you and let you ask anything that's on your mind. If I can roll the clock back to 2006 just for a minute, the American auto industry was headed for real trouble, and Ford was no exception. We all had overcapacity. The U.S. consumer was tapped out. Our margins were collapsing. And even though we were starting to build high-quality vehicles and starting to get recognized for that, nonetheless, it looked to me like we had tremendously rough waters ahead of us. So we did something that at the time we were ridiculed for. We went ahead and borrowed every penny that we could, $23 billion, and we mortgaged everything, including the Blue Oval, our trademark. And you can imagine the family meetings that came after that. You did what? Yes, we did, because it was clear to me that we had ahead of us a restructuring that was going to be enormous and unprecedented, and even with that, there was no guarantee that we were going to get through. So at the same time, I hired a fellow from Boeing, Alan Mullally, who had done a major restructuring at Boeing, and I thought he'd be the perfect guy to help us come do it. Turns out he was. And so with that, we launched a plan to try and get us through what we saw as a very, very difficult period ahead. Interestingly, our two principal competitors in the U.S. Either didn't see it the same way or didn't act as quickly. And then, of course, in 2007, the credit crunch hit. Credit dried up for customers, dried up for companies. And you all have lived through it. You know, it was a very, very tough time. Banks were failing. Banks were on the edge. Consumer confidence was horrible. And everything kind of ground to a halt. And in that era, both General Motors and Chrysler declared bankruptcy. And as a young boy growing up in Detroit, if anybody had ever said to me that I would live to see the day when Chrysler and GM were to declare bankruptcy, I would have said, no chance. This is a fairy tale, and not a very nice one. But in fact, it happened. And at that time, we had to make a decision at Ford. Did we want to accept federal bailout money or not? And it was a pretty quick discussion. Said, no, we didn't. We wanted to be masters of our own destiny. We wanted to chart our own course, and we thought we had the ability to do so. A couple things happened. Turns out things stopped getting worse. And as I was telling President Tillman at lunch, things didn't have to get measurably better. They just had to stop getting worse. And thankfully, things bottomed out in sort of the end of 2007, early 2008, and then just sort of held at a at a lousy level, but at least it held. And at that level, we started to dig ourselves out of the hole. What was really interesting, though, and something we never expected, was the fact that during that period, how our decision to not take federal money would resonate on Main Street America. We were inundated with letters, thousands of letters, from sort of people in the street from Midtown America who would say something like this: hey, I'm a small business owner, no one would ever bail me out, you guys did it the right way, and I've never bought a Ford before, but I'm going to consider one now. And and it was really heartwarming. I also told President Tillman, people are even sending us money. But it's true. I'd get $20 from some lady or $10 from some man somewhere saying, I don't know if this will help, but here you go. And so I had a great party with all of it. No, I sent it all back and thanked them. But it was really touching, and really, we actually had thought a very different kind of reaction might happen. We thought the customers may say, well, all my taxpayer money is in these companies, I guess I better go buy one. We never thought that people would, A, pay much attention to the fact that we didn't take bailout money, or B, would really care. So that was a really interesting time for us. And the good news is people did follow up on it. Our dealers were telling us they were seeing customers that they had never seen before. And the better news is we had a lot of good stuff to show them. And the reason for that is we made a very fundamental decision during the darkest time, and that was to not only keep our R&D money flowing, but to actually accelerate it at a time when most of our competitors were cutting back. And not just GM and Chrysler, but our competitors across the board were seeing tough times, and they were cutting back on R&D. But Alan Mullally and I spent many, many afternoons and early evenings and late evenings sometimes talking about there's no point in going through all this hardship if there's no light at the end of the tunnel. If we stopped investing in the new technology just to survive, what would survival look like? And what's the point? And so we did. We kept investing in lots of new technology, which I'll touch upon in a moment. So when we came, when the fog started to lift a little bit, we had lots of new stuff to sell and lots of new technology that people found interesting. And now, of course, we're getting all the business publications saying, what was your secret to all this? And of course, there was no secret. There was just a plan and a will to execute the plan, and that was it. We thought our plan was right, and the question was, did we have enough time? Well, it turns out, yes, we did have enough time, and then it was all about execution. One of the things that I'm so proud of is there was nobody in the Ford boardroom, nobody in the Ford family, and nobody in the employee ranks who spent 10 minutes second-guessing what we were doing. They were all behind us. They all said, yep, we believe in it, let's go. And everybody knew it was going to be a whitewater trip, and in fact it was. But everybody was resolved to make it happen. And that was incredibly energizing to us, to walk into our building in the worst of times and having the employees say to us, hey, everything's going to be fine, don't worry. That was huge. And so, and I don't know how you ever put a price tag on something like that, but it's the belief and the goodwill that we had with our employees, with our dealers, and frankly, as it turned out, with the public, which, again, surprised us a bit, but it was pretty neat. If anything good came of these last 5 years, I think it's this. There was finally a recognition in this country that manufacturing matters. Because prior to that, there was a sense that manufacturing was sort of, very 20th century. It was Rust Belt America. It was, yesterday's news, and nobody who was particularly bright or ambitious would ever want to go into that, and that we would ultimately become a service economy. But the trouble was, for America, other countries didn't think that way. And it drove me crazy because, for instance, I'd go to Australia and I'd meet with the Prime Minister and he'd say, what can I do for you? But it wasn't a rhetorical question because they had a manufacturing policy in place and an energy policy. And you could say, well, if you could change this, this, and this, then this, this, and this would happen. In America, if anybody said, what can I do for you, there's no point in even answering because it was all too difficult, because there was no policy in place, there was no framework to even have a discussion. And so I really believe, though, that these last few years, there has been an appreciation in the country that manufacturing things does matter. And it matters to the economy, it matters to our national security, and it provides great jobs and lots of them. And I think that is a benefit, because there really hasn't been a strong economy since the Industrial Revolution anywhere in the world that didn't have a strong manufacturing base. And so, but that isn't changing, but what is changing is the nature of manufacturing. It's no longer belching, pollutants into the sky with, sort of Darwinian conditions inside a plant and a sweatshop mentality. It's become, green, high-tech, and what we're making is going to be green and high-tech. And I think that's a much more appealing view of what manufacturing is and should be. And that's what we're becoming. And because of that, this really is the most exciting time in my 30 years. I've been at Ford 31 years, which is staggering to think about, at least it is for me. But it's the most exciting time in my time here, because technology is really liberating us now and is allowing us to achieve a vision that I've long held, but was always kind of out of reach. And we're dealing with suppliers now like Microsoft and Apple, not just axle suppliers. And so it's a different world that we're in now than we were in even 5 years ago. It's very exciting and it's very cool. Who would have thought that we would have been asked 2 years in a row to give the keynote address at the Consumer Electronics Show, a car company? We were never even invited to the Consumer Electronics Show before. So, and we're winning awards for our technology. Our sync technology we developed with Microsoft that's in our vehicles now, which basically, and what we're really doing is we're bringing all the elements of the handhelds and your computer into your vehicle in a way that hopefully isn't causing driver distraction, and that's a whole other discussion which we can have. But it's really becoming a very seamless bit of technology. Your car is with your phone, with your house. Let me just pause here for a second and just talk about sort of what my environmental vision, how it came about, and ultimately now how technology is going to actually see it through. When I was at Princeton, before I went to Princeton, I grew up in Detroit, and cars were cool, and that was the end of the story. The Beach Boys wrote songs about cars, and cars were freedom, cars were fun, and it was, everybody remembers their cars and their friends' cars and the front seats and the back seats. They were great, and so. But then I got to Princeton, and I started hearing from professors that that the world was changing, and that the auto industry was not such a great thing. That it was filling our skies with smoke and from the plants, and it was filling our cities with smog from the tailpipes. And it really struck a chord with me, and I became very interested in the environment. And as I said in my opening statements, I really wished that we had then what you all have now, which are these great resources where I could have really developed my thinking. But so as I was at Princeton, I developed this notion that I didn't want the car business, I didn't really care about anybody else but Ford, to become like the tobacco industry, where we would basically be a socially unacceptable place to work, and we wouldn't get the best and brightest because they would have to apologize to their family and their friends for working there. And it struck me that that's where we were headed unless we changed dramatically. So then I went and joined Ford really right after graduation, and was kind of shocked to see that the professors were right, that there was this head in the sand mentality in Detroit, and I sort of naively now, looking back, decided that I was going to try and change it. And to say that I wasn't well received was pretty much an understatement, I think. I was considered a Bolshevik and lots of other things that by suggesting that we needed to be much more conscious of emissions and fuel economy. And I joined the board in 1988, I think. I think that's right. But anyway, and I was pulled in to one of the top-ranking offices and said I had to stop associating with any known or suspected environmentalists. And I thanked them, and I walked out and immediately started to interact with more environmentalists. And then, you know, ultimately, I ended up being the first sort of business person, and certainly the first industrialist to ever speak to the Greenpeace annual conference. I think it was in 2000. And when I got back to Detroit, that was not, I didn't exactly have a ticker tape parade waiting for me. But you know, it was really important to me that we start to build bridges because the environmental community was encamped on one side, the industrial community was encamped on the other side, and there was no dialogue taking place. And so it was an interesting journey. But in fairness to, you know, to what was going on in the marketplace, there wasn't a great demand pull for green vehicles. And why? Well, gasoline was cheaper than bottled water. You know, and what really amounted to was, you know, everybody wanted to, they wanted all their neighbors to be environmentalists, but they wanted to drive what they wanted to drive. And, you know, and that's kind of the way it went. People loved their own car and hated everybody else's. And the trade-offs that people were asked to make to drive environmentally friendly cars until very recently were too onerous for most people because, frankly, if you said to somebody, do you want to be green, everybody would say yes. But then you'd say, okay, you're willing to give up space? Are you willing to pay more? Are you willing to give up horsepower? Are you willing? Basically, people had to drive no fun econo boxes with AM radios and no air conditioning. And, you know, and that really wasn't most people's idea of a lot of fun. And so, but the technology didn't really exist to deliver a no trade-off experience. What's so cool now, if you fast forward to today, is it's all happening, and it's happening in real time. And I think what's going on in the world of engine technology is absolutely staggering because if you look at the first 100 years of Ford Motor Company, which is, I think we're 108 now? 108. First 103 years, nothing changed much. Internal combustion engines, okay, they were refined, but it was pretty much the same thing all the way back to my great-grandfather's Model T. But now, you know, we are introducing, we'll have 5 electric vehicles on the road in the next couple years. We have biofuel vehicles. We're still investing in hydrogen, both fuel cell and internal combustion engines. We're dramatically cleaning up the gasoline internal combustion engines, and we have clean diesels. I mean, I certainly have a point of view where this is all going, but the point is there's a lot of really cool technology being developed right now, not all of which will ultimately play out. Some will be transition technologies, but it's all happening, and it's happening now, and it's happening in a way the customer doesn't have to make trade-offs. I mean, it's, and with a minor exception on pure electric, because we still have to build out the infrastructure and all that, and we can get into that if you'd like during the Q&A. But you know, to me, it's really exciting that you know, for 31 years, I've been struggling with how to make a green car company. And you know, I actually almost left Ford several times during my early years to go join an NGO because I felt so strongly that change had to happen. But then I was always, you know, coming back to the fact that, well, if I didn't stay and change it, who would? And so, but you know, it was hard because there weren't a lot of kindred spirits back then, because a lot of people, I think, just couldn't see the possibility of what green could look like, not just in the vehicles, but in the plants themselves. So I really feel great that while we certainly haven't declared victory, we got a long road ahead of us, but I think you can see a line of sight now to energy independence and clean vehicles. And to me, that's really awesome. It'll happen in my lifetime. But as this is all happening, there's another big issue that's looming out there, and looming rather large. It's not getting much airtime yet. And that's this notion of global gridlock that I think is going to hit us because I've got a few facts here because I don't memorize these. But okay, by mid-century, 75% of the world's population will live in cities, and 50 of those will be greater than 10 million or more. And most of those cities won't have the infrastructure to move people around efficiently. So the question is not going to be to jam more cars. And in fact, today there are 800 million vehicles on the road today. If you just future this out and nothing else changed, there would be 3 to 4 billion vehicles on the road then. But where are they going to go? And where, and where are you going to store them? Where are they going to drive? And this is going to be a big, big issue and we're going to see it last here in the U.S. If you go to Asia today, you're already starting to see it. I mean, you go to Beijing, and the average commute is 2.5 hours today. You all saw that fun traffic jam they had last summer of 11 days. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's more to come. And so if you think about moving people, and if I look back at my great-grandfather's original vision of personal mobility and the freedom that allowed people, it's interesting. Before the Model T, most people never traveled more than 20 miles from home in their entire lifetime. And that's an incredible statistic. But then the Model T opened the roads to people and allowed them to choose where they lived, where they played, and where they worked. And so for most of the 108 years of Ford Motor Company, that personal freedom was a great thing. And then you think about the ambulances and the school buses and the police cars and the fire trucks that were also made to help society, and that was great. But the limits to that, were not really known. And the first limits, of course, I just discussed were the environmental limits. And now I think we're coming on the physical limits of just too many cars, too many people. But how are you going to then preserve the individual mobility? And it won't be just mass transit, because people mass transit's great, and I've always been for it. And in fact, I don't ever see a conflict between individual car ownership and mass transit at all. But people don't move in a linear fashion. People move all around how they want to move around. So mass transit will be part of it, but there has to be more. And I don't yet know what that looks like. There's some interesting experiments that are starting to pop up. In Hong Kong, there's a project called Octopus, which basically pulls all the transportation assets of Hong Kong together: the subways, the buses, the rent-a-cars, the taxis, the bicycles, and you get ticketed through your cell phone for going to point A to point B on any one of those assets. And that's interesting, but that only works if there's a city actually has control of all those things. That doesn't, New York, that'd be an interesting exercise, or Mumbai, or places like that. But I think that the notion of integrating all the transportation assets of a city, and then if you then think about having a hub where they all come together, or lots of hubs where they come together, where you get off the subway and get on a Segway, or get off the bus and get in a taxi, or get in a zip car, or whatever, then those hubs have to be clean, safe, and they probably become social hubs too, with restaurants and coffee shops where people will naturally want to congregate as they. That kind of vision, I think, can start to take place. Lots of other things that are really cool that are just starting to get going, some of which are being worked on here. The notion of driverless cars, real-time vehicles that speak to each other, vehicle to vehicle. We're spending a lot of time and money and intellectual capital on vehicle-to-vehicle communication. So a car in front could say to a car a mile back, hey, traffic jam, and then your car could immediately reroute you to a better route. This is interesting, most of the congestion in cities is caused by people looking for parking spaces. So it's true. And so what if you, when you left your apartment or your house, would prearrange a parking spot on at the grocery store, 10 minutes ahead it would be there. And you would also have real-time info as you drove into a city and where the available parking spots were at that moment. Those things are not that far out there. Actually, this is stuff that's almost ready for prime time. So we're just starting to nibble at the edges of this solution for personal mobility in a way too crowded world. But we certainly don't have all the answers yet. We're not actually, as I say, we're really not even having the dialogue yet. I think that'll come up very soon. So, I guess it's the way of the world. You get one huge problem, you think, just sort of within your line of sight, and all of a sudden this other thing pops up, and you go, oh my God, how are we going to deal with that? But I think it's really exciting. And just like on the green issue, excuse me, it'll be technology that basically allows us to have, continue to have the individual freedom and mobility that we've all come to sort of take for granted. And I think people would very grudgingly give up if they had to. So with that, what I think I'd like to do is just sort of stop here. And anything that's on your mind, I'd like to have at it. So, yeah?
Yes, sir. My father-in-law was UAW Ford, and certainly Ford and the UAW were very much influential in establishing a middle class in the United States. What do you see as the trends toward employment of Americans, employment of non-Americans, and where did we come from? What does it look like in the future?
Well, it's interesting. Thank you for that. I'm of the view, it drives me nuts sometimes when I go places and people say, well, how do you deal with those damn unions? I don't think the union, look, we're the ones that gave it to them. If there was any inequity in the system, it took two to tango. And frankly, we work very well with our union. We deal with the United Auto Workers. They've been a great partner with us. We don't always agree, but frankly, I look at them as Ford employees. I don't look at them as union members. They're all part of the Ford family. And so, and we certainly share a common view that manufacturing in America matters. And so, where do I see employment going? Well, I think first of all, as I said earlier, it's a good thing that there is a recognition that we should be making things in this country. And I would actually say to all of the students here, I'm kind of tired of our best and brightest always going to Wall Street. I'd rather have you come help us solve some of these huge problems and help make the world a better place and create wealth by making things. It's just a small sales pitch, but it's but it's true because I think of what we're doing, and first of all, it's really cool to work on these issues. Second of all, if we make breakthroughs, it's going to affect everybody in a positive manner, and I think that I think that manufacturing and R&D and technology development should all happen in this country. I believe it will happen in this country. But it's. I think I understand the gist of your question. There are a lot of competing forces out there, lower cost places to manufacture. But it's interesting about cars. Cars are big things. They're tough to ship. I mean, they're expensive to ship. So we prefer to make them where we sell them. I mean, it's interesting. My great-grandfather believed that because he thought it was the right thing to do for the local communities. But frankly, the business model would sustain that through to today. That on balance, we'd like to be, we'd like to build where we sell it. And so other items that maybe are certainly smaller and more easily shipped might have a different point of view on that. But it's hard for me to imagine a strong America and a strong industrial base without a strong contribution from the auto sector. But as I said, it has to be a different kind of auto sector. It has to be a cleaner auto sector, a more high-tech auto sector, and we're becoming that. But and really the multiplier effect on a manufacturing job versus any other type of job, it's not even close. In our industry, one manufacturing job spawns 10 other jobs. And that's a huge, huge multiplier that you don't see in most other sectors. So given that, I'm really happy we're hiring now in America again. We've added, I think, 1,000 jobs this year, and we announced 2,500 next year, manufacturing jobs in the U.S. that are new. So, I want to see us continue to do that. Yes?
So you spoke earlier about the advantages of not accepting federal bailout money. What about competitive disadvantages that came about as a result of GM and Chrysler receiving the protection of the bankruptcy court and also receiving federal money? Were there competitive disadvantages, and if so, how did Ford deal with them?
Well, yeah, there were huge competitive disadvantages with our decision. First of all, they got a clean balance sheet, and we didn't. We had 20+ billion, almost 30 billion in debt, and overnight they ended up with a clean balance sheet. They ended up with a huge cash infusion, and one thing that people kind of don't typically know is GM's not going to have to pay taxes for many years. It was unusual. In most bankruptcies, you don't get to carry forward all your prior tax losses, but they did. So they have a triple advantage. They got a clean balance sheet, they got a ton of cash, and they're not going to pay taxes for a long time. Having said that, I wouldn't trade places with them. I love where we are. I like our freedom. We're paying our debt down much faster than I think people thought we could. Frankly, we're paying our debt down faster than we thought we could. And so pretty soon, I mean, we're doing it with real money rather than, taxpayer money, but which, I guess is real money too, but it feels more real when you have to go borrow it yourself. But those are significant competitive disadvantages for us that they would emerge with, with one day they wake up and it's all there, just as I described. We have a mountain of debt. We have to pay taxes, and our balance sheet is anything but pristine. It's becoming more pristine. In fact, we're getting close to getting back to investment grade, which is a goal we've set for ourselves, and it's getting closer. Every year we sort of are we're pulling that time frame closer. So it's not a temporary disadvantage. I mean, it is a temporary disadvantage. We don't think it's permanent. It's not structural, but nonetheless, you asked what they were, and those are the main ones. But as I said, I kind of like where we are. Yes?
What are the plans for the Ecoboost line of motors? And will we see it maybe in something as iconic as the Mustang?
The question was, what are we going to do with the Ecoboost motors? Ecoboost is this technology that we've introduced on our gasoline engines and actually in our diesel engines in Europe, which basically allows you to get the fuel economy of a 4-cylinder with the power of a 6-cylinder, or the fuel economy of a 6 with the power of an 8. And it's direct injection turbocharging, and it's not a terribly complex, but it's it was a big deal for us because it's not expensive for the customer. They get power and fuel economy, and also towing capability if they want it on a bigger vehicle. And the question is it going to be available in the Mustang? Yes. Yes.
This is an emissions question. The plug-in electrics would theoretically have no emissions out of the tailpipe, but there is the power plant that has to generate the electricity. What's the balance there?
It's a really good question. This is why we need a national energy policy, because you've hit on the key dilemma that we face. We could have clean tailpipe, emission-free vehicles, but if we're building coal-fired power plants to power that, it's not a great equation. Now, I'll say parenthetically, it's easier to control emissions from a stationary source than a mobile one, so maybe it's still not a good trade-off. But I think here's where we are in this development of electric vehicles, and it does require a national conversation because you've got to build out a smart grid, and that doesn't exist. And what that means is basically, the local power company in Detroit can't speak, so to speak, with the power company in Toledo, Ohio. Different systems can't transfer power, and so we're really sub-optimizing our energy generating capability. So we've got to build out the smart grid. Well, first of all, you have to have a common definition of what the smart grid is, because it's sort of like saying sustainability. It kind of means something different to everybody. But basically, we have to define it, and then we have to build it out, and then we have to power it. And because I do think electric vehicles are the way to go. We have 3 types of electric vehicles today. You have the pure electric vehicle, and that pure electric vehicle is completely emissions-free. They're fun to drive, great torque. They're a blast, actually. And you can load them up with all the things that you'd like to put in a car. The problem is going to be, and always will be, one of range. So if you live in San Francisco and you drive around the city most days, that's perfect. But if one day you want to drive down to Los Angeles, you're probably out of luck. So then we go to the plug-in hybrid, which some of you have heard of. And basically, what that is it allows you to drive the first, I'm going to make this up, 40 miles typically on electric. And once that's exhausted, an internal combustion engine kicks in, and then you can drive forever. So again, if you live in San Francisco and most of your daily driving's 20 miles, you're just driving on electric. But then you do have the freedom to drive to LA on the weekend if that's what you want to do. The third type is what you're most familiar with, which is a conventional hybrid, which basically trades back and forth between an electric motor and a gasoline engine. And you as a customer don't have to do anything different. You have to plug it in, you just fill it up, and then the vehicle does its thing. And those are the three types of electric vehicles that are out there. The only completely clean one is pure electric. But that does have range limitations. And that will change too as battery development, you get, and storage capability and all those things start to build out. So, you would expect that to become a better equation as time goes on, and I certainly do. But as we sit here today, that's sort of what we're looking at, those three kinds of vehicles. All of them are better than kind of what we've been used to. I think for at least the medium term, the plug-in hybrid really, in many ways, has a lot of utility. But it's not totally clean. And the other thing is, you need to be able to charge we've developed this charging system with Microsoft where your home will, and you actually have an app on the phone where you can charge, you can see wherever you are in the world what the status of your charger is. You can tell your car to start charging even if you're in another country. But you can tell it to start charging when it gets the best rates, because one of the things that what we've developed is a system where you will know as the customer plugging your car in or your truck in, when's the best time for me to do this? When am I going to get the best rates from the utility? Typically it's in the evening when they have excess capacity, and typically the worst time to charge is 4 o'clock on a hot summer afternoon. But you will know that, and if you're a little bit flexible, you can take advantage of that. So there are lots of different technologies that are being developed around the electric equation that are interesting and are going to be very helpful to people. And we're just starting to scratch the surface. I mean, the rate of change and the rate of innovation is huge in this area. And it's really going to be up to us to try and keep up with it. Because you think of a car cycle is typically 3 years or 3.5 years from time we start to develop it to the time it hits the market. That's a lifetime in technology terms. And so one of the things that what we've done at Ford, which I love, is we're now building our vehicles on global platforms. So the vehicle we sell in Europe will be the same as in Asia, the same as in North America. Allows you to introduce technology at a much faster speed because you're only developing this thing once, and then you can add on as technology develops. Helps you spread the costs out over millions of vehicles rather than thousands of vehicles. And frankly, that was our strategy on electrification. Some of our competitors have chosen to build a dedicated electric vehicle. Here it is. The problem with that is they don't have any idea what the demand's going to be. And if it's less than they thought, they're going to have to discount them and try and shove them out the door. And it's hard to modernize it because you can't justify the cost of investment in this standalone thing. What we've done is, for instance, we've taken our Focus vehicle, which we sell about 2 million of around the world, and we're electrifying different parts of different families of the Focus. So if, and they're all coming down the same assembly line. For instance, we're building in Wayne, Michigan. And if there's a big upswing in demand for electric, that's fine. We can flex up more of those and sell less of the gasoline version. If the electric isn't in demand, we just take that down. We turn up the gasoline. That was a kind of a bet we made that we thought was, because we don't know what the true demand's going to be. And it would allow us also to keep our pricing lower because we're spreading the cost over millions of vehicles rather than a few hundred or thousand. So it's a different approach for Ford than what you've seen maybe with some of the other manufacturers. And it hasn't really been articulated fully yet because the vehicles really aren't even out there. But it was a point of view that we had in terms of what we thought would ultimately be best for the customer, give them the most choice and ultimately allow the best pricing and allow real customer demand to dictate what happens rather than trying to shove them out the door and having to discount them. Yes?
You mentioned 3 types of electric vehicles. You build the first, you build the third, but you don't build the one in the middle.
The plug-in?
The one that uses a gasoline engine to charge the battery. In other words, Chevy Volt. Back when I was in high school, I did a term paper, that was back in the 60s, on exactly that same process, because it's no different than a diesel locomotive and how it operates. And yet that seems to me to be the most logical one, but yet it's the one that is not, they're not just coming to market.
It is just coming to market. We are building, it's actually not in production yet, but it'll be in production by the end of the year. And the Chevy Volt, there was a, man, I don't really want to talk about Chevy much, but it was a, you know, they first said it was all electric, and oh no, I guess it's an electric assist, and basically it's a plug-in electric is what it is. And that's, you know, it's a technology that I said a second ago I think is, you know, really interesting because it does allow maximum flexibility for the buyer. It may not be the best environmental long-term, but it's an interesting transitional technology, I think, and that's what we're doing. You know, we are going to have all three. We'll have the pure electric, we'll have the plug-in electric, and we'll have the conventional hybrid. Yes?
In light of, you mentioned sort of there's two drivers in efficiency, which is one of the problems is you know, you want to be efficient, you want your neighbors to be efficient. Does increasing sort of a bottom-up need for efficiency through like a gas tax or some other similar means help you in
Yeah.
your environmental support? Or
That's a really good question. For those who couldn't hear it, you know, is to drive efficiency through the economy, would I favor something like a gas tax? Yes. I've been screaming for a gas tax for 10 years. Problem is, there's no political will to get it done. So I've stopped talking about it because it's not going to happen. But to illustrate the point, in Europe, you know, several years ago, they decided they wanted to come down the CO2 glide path. And so this, at the time, the best strategy for the European manufacturers, of which Ford was one, was clean diesel, because, you know, things like electric weren't on the horizon yet. This is, you know, going back a few years. And so it was interesting because the NGOs, the government representatives, and the automakers all got around a table, and you can imagine the kind of opinions that were being thrown around. But remarkably, all agreed upon a CO2 glide path, and then they said, okay, well, how are we going to get there? Well, the manufacturers said, well, the only way we can get there is if we sell fewer gasoline engines and we sell more diesel engines, and because that'll increase fuel economy and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so the governments then said, all right, then our job is to put in place a taxation policy that will drive that customer behavior. And they did. So if you pull into a gas station today in Europe, the price of diesel is significantly lower than the price of petrol because of the taxation structure. And guess what? It worked. Customers, you know, aren't stupid. They pulled in and said, guess I better get rid of my gasoline engine. I want a diesel. And the mix of diesels just took off as everyone hoped it would, and the CO2 slope came down. You know, and so there's a real-life example. And my gosh, if they can do it in Europe with all those different countries and all those different point of views, and you know, it shouldn't be impossible here. But I, you know, having said that, I'm not sure there's any political appetite. In fact, I'm quite sure there's not a political appetite for a gas tax, and I think that's too bad. It's not the only strategy we can employ by any means, but it probably would have been a useful one. And your basic point is absolutely right.
Well, could we take maybe one more question?
Yeah, I see a lot of people falling asleep. That's good. You pick them out.
Oh.
Oh, okay, yes, yes.
I had two questions. Choose which you prefer to answer. What was the on-the-scene decision-making like in deciding to announce the Focus Electric at CES? And then the other possible question is, what's next for my Ford Touch?
Oh, well, those are good questions. Well, you know, the CES was obviously an interesting place, a non-traditional place for us to announce a vehicle. But if you think of the technology that it took, you know, to create that vehicle, and the kind of people that would be interested in that vehicle, clearly the CES was the kind of place, and also the Focus, the next generation Focus, which has been completely redesigned, is really, you know, I believe is going to appeal to a much younger audience than traditionally before. So you marry that with all electric, and a place like CES where you have a lot of young people who are leading thinkers and very interested in technology, it kind of became, in my mind, you know, a logical place for us to do it. So there wasn't a ton of, it really wasn't that tough a decision. Everyone, once we started talking about it, it became kind of, yeah, that's cool, let's do it. What's next for Myford Touch? Well, those of you who don't know Myford Touch, it's sort of like bringing an iPad into the car, and it really combines your phone, your iPod, or actually your entire entertainment system, your GPS, and the climate, all in one entity. And you can either do it through voice, or you can do it, through touch. Now, some of those things are disabled as you start moving, because driver distraction is a big deal. So what's next? Well, if you think about, kind of what's logically, to go next, you can really add on to the GPS features quite easily. And things about, parking spots and those kinds of things. All of a sudden, the apps are almost limitless, and we have open architecture on it, and we do it because we want people to start to develop all kinds of stuff. So really, there's more. It's coming at us so fast that we're trying to figure out a way not to overwhelm people, because one thing that we do know is, as cool as technology can be, you can freak people out. And even the Myford Touch, I mean, even me, I do this for a living, I had to sit with it for 15 minutes, which isn't long, but when I first got in the car, I had to sit and play with it a little bit to make sure, do I understand this, do I understand this? So, and I won't mention the competitor, but a few years ago, one of our luxury competitors introduced a very complex technology into its vehicle, and nobody knew how to drive it. And it was really technology for technology's sake, not technology for the customer. And so what we're trying to do with everything we do is make sure we look at it through the customer's eyes, say, is this something they're going to value, and is it something they're going to understand? And because you all know the world of technology is so vast, and there's so much cool stuff out there. But the question is, how can we do it in a way that's really consumer friendly? And so the Myford Touch really is just the beginning of the platform, and it's going to be built upon and built upon, so that it will look, I think, in 5 years almost unrecognizable today.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Very compelling talk, and we can't let you come to Princeton without giving you something orange and black. So
awesome.
here's something
Thank you
orange
so
and black.
much. Thank you.
Very
Thanks.
much.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you.